Welcome friends, my name is Sande. I'm an integrative clinical nutritionist from Australia, and we are going to present this amazing seminar about the gluten connection. We've been presenting these seminars in Australia for a number of years, and the feedback from the people is amazing. How many changes they have been able to accomplish in their health by taking notes on some of the things that we actually share in this seminar. Okay, so that's us at newfootsteps.com.au. We actually have a number of seminars in regards to health. We have vegetarians and the nutrient connection. We have the weight connection. We have the bacteria connection. We have children with learning difficulties, nutrition and exercise connection. So there is, we have the gut connection, everything about the gut. So we encourage you to get hold of the other seminars and learn more about your body and the health that you can actually attain because of it. Now, in this first session of the gluten connection, there will be three sessions, three presentations on this topic. We are going to talk about the history of amalgamation. Okay, we'll just go through a brief history of wheat in particular. Now, as we do in every one of our seminars, we have to give you a reminder that the New Footsteps lecture series are designed to share valuable information with the general public. They are not to be used as a treatment for individual cases. For online appointments, visit our website. Okay? Now, we need to be careful because towards the end of this seminar, on the third session, we will put a sample of a protocol. But that sample of protocol does not take into account your own personal situation. So it will be at your own risk if you go ahead with some of the things that will be presented in that protocol. It is just more general than anything else, and we will make sure that we put many pointers there to point you in the right direction so your common sense is always activated. Okay, you know that common sense is one of the biggest oxymorons nowadays because it's not common. Okay, so that is bread and pasta and muffins and everything else that is yummy. Okay, now I have to say to you, I am a Christian, so I am also aware of the spiritual significance of bread. Jesus Christ is called the bread of life. We know stories of miracles with bread and fishes. And it was interesting to me as a practitioner how in many cases years ago people will come and visit me as a patient. I will try different things. I will remove them from wheat, and guess what? In many cases that I considered that wheat was the problem, they actually got better. Now that was a huge challenge to my understanding because what am I taking them off? I am taking them off bread. I mean, that's the substance of life. Bread has sustained civilizations from way back. As my brother would say, the bread of always? Yeah, that bread, or maybe it's not the bread of always, as we will learn in this presentation. Okay, so we all love bread, or most people love bread, even those that they already have discovered that bread doesn't agree with them. I had many people that said to me, I know what my problem is, the bread. I eat, I feel bloated. I said, so what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? Also, well, you eat, you feel bloated. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. I love bread. So, and that person obviously is entitled to that. Okay, but the reality is that there's some people that bread does not make them happy. In fact, it makes them very, very sad. And when we're talking about gluten, the first thing that comes to mind as a condition, we think of celiac disease. Okay? Now, in this seminar, we are going to go further than celiac disease, and we're going to try to gain understanding of what's going on of this, what appears to be an epidemic nowadays. Okay? Now, I want you to follow along this quote with me. It says, all individuals, even those with a low degree of risk, are therefore susceptible to some form of gluten reaction during their lifespan. So according to this study, every individual at some point in their in their life will suffer some kind of reaction to gluten. Now, that reaction to gluten might actually just be 2 weeks because you've been in hospital, because you've been with medication, because everything upset you around you in hospital, and then somebody gave you a bread roll and you felt uneasy, or it just gave you diarrhea. And that was that one-off time. So bear in mind that when we're saying all individuals, or when this quote says all individuals, is referring to different situations and circumstances, but is acknowledging that everyone at some point in their lives, for one reason or another, will have an adverse reaction to gluten. Okay? Now, from the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, we have the first gathering of information of wheat. And we know that civilization actually started to develop in a rich way with culture and settlements and everything else because of cultivation, especially of grain, especially of wheat. Okay? Now, from Mesopotamia, there were people that moved that grain to Egypt. So, for instance, that's an Egyptian painting of the gathering of the wheat. And as you see through civilizations, wheat has been there all throughout, especially in the strongest empires that have been moving along history. Okay? From the Mesopotamian era, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Babylonians, all those empires, they follow through a pattern of wheat and bread eating. Now, I want to expand on that quote that I shared with you in the beginning. All individuals, even those with a low degree of risk, are therefore susceptible to some form of gluten reaction during their lifespan. Now, notice this. Therefore, it is not surprising that during the past 50 years, we have witnessed an epidemic of celiac disease and a surging of new gluten-related disorders, including the most recently described gluten sensitivity. So this study is acknowledging, is gathering data, and is acknowledging that it appears that in the last 50 years or so, we are witnessing an epidemic. I mean, now health food corridors in the shopping center, they're not health food corridors, they're what? Gluten-free corridors. You know, everything is gluten-free, you know, and it's amazing because it's just got into the psyche of everybody. You know, there are somebody selling eggs on the side of the road, and they said, eggs, gluten-free. The eggs are gluten-free. Okay, so everybody just wants to put gluten-free on anything, just for the sake of, it appears to be healthier too, isn't it? Now, notice this. According to the study, in the last 50 years or so, we've been witnessing an increase, an epidemic of gluten-related conditions. Okay, in the last, how long? 50 years. Now, this is very significant because if a person is severely reacting to gluten, okay, there are people that will consume gluten and they will have almost an anaphylactic reaction and they will die. And if they don't die quickly, they will eventually die in a slow process of malnutrition. Okay? Now, if you have a little child and you continue to give him bread and that child has a reaction to that bread, that child is going to get sick and sicker unless you actually remove that wheat and you start giving him alternatives. If that child dies before the age of maturity and he doesn't have any children, what happened to that gene that has a predisposition of reacting to gluten? What happened to that gene? Dies with him. So think about this. If this has always been at the level that it is currently, we should actually see lots of cases in the past history and less today. Why less and less? Because many won't make it to the next generation. That gene or that the seed of that person will not pass into the next generation because he died too young. So it's like the strongest or the strongest follow through, but the weakest will die in the way. Is that what we see? Now, we see very little references. There are references, but we see very little references in history. And we actually see the opposite. We see very little in the past and a lot of references today. A lot of cases today. We actually see the opposite. Okay, I'm going to show you a number of wheat plants here. One of them is called the acorn. It's the one on your left. Acorn means the original wheat, is the original grain. This is the Mesopotamian wheat. Okay, it has 14 chromosomes, comes from Mesopotamia, and it was the original one. This is probably the one that a gentleman by the name of Father Abraham probably took to Egypt in one of his trips. In Egypt, we actually find the wild emmer. The wild emmer has 28 chromosomes and it was found in Egypt and Israel. Now, notice 28 chromosomes. That means that a new daddy has been included. Okay, from 14 from the acorn to the wild emmer 28. Now that new daddy was the goat grass. It's called goat grass, that provided another 14 chromosomes. And it being a wild emmer, that means that they actually engaged and got married by themselves. Okay, so it was just a nature involvement, if you want to call it that way. All right, and we also have the emmer, or the more domesticated version, which came across by the farmers of that time, just choosing the best grain and sort of narrowing down a much better crop. Okay, that was the emmer. The emmer was probably the one that a gentleman by the name of Joseph stored up in Egypt for a number of years when there was a huge famine and drought in the land. So that was the emmer. Now, I was in Western Australia. I was talking to a farmer of the wheat belt in Western Australia, and he said, that story is false. And I said, why is it false? He said, because you cannot store up wheat in a warehouse or whatever for 14 years. And I said, oh, why not? He said, because it will get all moldy. I'll actually explain through this seminar why it was possible back then, and it's actually literally not possible. That farmer is right. It is not possible today. But I'll tell you later why it is possible, or it was possible back then. Okay? So we have also 28 chromosomes. So the emmer was probably the bread that was used in Bible times, and also the bread that was used in Jesus' time. Okay? Then we have the durum wheat, 28 chromosomes. This is the one that you get pasta from. Durum wheat for pasta. Then we have kamut, 28 chromosomes. They are actually natural hybrids. It means that they just got a girlfriend among themselves. They're very, very close relatives among themselves, and they just come up with a new variety as a natural hybrid. And so is, as a natural hybrid, the spelt. Have you heard of the spelt? Okay, spelt, it was a Roman grain, but it was a natural hybrid. It just came up and then it got cultivated. It has a much nuttier flavor, but there's something else that is happening already with the spelt. It has now 42 chromosomes. That means that the spelt has one daddy more than yours. It has one parent more than you. So you have two parents, and this fellow here already has three. So that was the Central Europe variety, and the Romans used to use that. It is a hybrid, but it was a natural hybrid, that it has more than 2,000 years of existence. Okay? And then we have this thing. This thing, that photo is from the wheat belt in Australia. Okay? And it has 42 chromosomes, and this is the wheat that is cultivated around the world today. Okay? Now, one of the things that you actually noticed is the height of that wheat. When you look at the images all through history, the ancient history, and carvings on the rock of temples and so on for harvest time, you always see the wheat getting up to this height or so. So there's either two things. Our ancestors were very, 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 very small, or our wheat has somehow shrunk. Okay? Now, this is the father of genetics. His name was Gregor Mendel, and was the first to understand the inheritance and segregation. If you did biology at the school, in high school, you will probably remember Mendel's peas, green peas. He will just get the dominant gene and the recessive gene, and he will create different varieties of peas just using pure genetics and the genetic pool of one pair of peas. Okay? He also, many people don't know this, but he also created, just using genetics, he created a new variety of honeybee. And he used it in his lab, and he destroyed it. The reason why he destroyed it is because that honeybee was so violent that he actually considered it not appropriate to release it into the wild. Okay? So that was Mendel with his dominant gene and recessive genes. And he published his finding in 1866, but it was not until 34 years later and 16 years after his death that his work was brought to light. So basically in the turning of the 20th century. And it was then when this happened. The most influential of all the wheat breeding advantages in the early 20th century was the introduction of the RHT8 reduced height gene to the various wheat populations around the world. So they found a gene, okay? And by stimulating that gene, the wheat went from this height to this height. Now, what is the significance of that? For instance, all of those wheat varieties there, they're all ready for harvest. All ready for harvest, all of them. Now, if you look at the one on the left, the tall one, you have the grain, and then you have all the straw. What do you use the straw for? Yeah, but there's actually considered a waste, okay? Because you want just the grain. Yeah, you can give it to the animals, but it's not actually a proper. You can supplement the diet of the animals with some straw, but it's not actually sustainable. So it's mainly waste. You know, people will burn it in the old days and so on. So you actually have that much grain, and the rest was waste. What happens when you have a wheat this high and it's windy? It will fall over. What happens if I have the same amount of wheat, but it is this high? That's much better for the wind, isn't it? Good. Does it make sense to reduce the height? Yes, we reduce the height. It's much better because we don't get so much distraction and so on. Okay. But sometimes, you know, we change things and the outcome is not what we expect. We'll read along. This is considered the modern Joseph, a man that has, through his efforts to introduce hybrid cereals varieties into agriculture in developing countries, are estimated to have saved about 1 billion people from dying of hunger. Okay? Now, how many of you remember in the 80s about the hunger in places like Ethiopia and Kenya? Yes, you remember that. Okay, do you remember which were the countries in the hunger zone in the 60s? 50s and 60s was not Kenya and the African countries, but rather was Pakistan and India. Yeah, but mainly Pakistan and India was the ones that was in the news continuously, and those areas there. So, what actually happened after the Second World War, in 1944, this gentleman, Dr. Borlaug, joins the Rockefeller Foundation cooperative project with the Mexican government. So this is a threefold cooperation between science, the Mexican government, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and it all to appease the hunger in the world in that time of history around Pakistan and India. Are you not glad that the Rockefeller Foundation is interested in our health and the fact that we don't die of hunger? I mean, people think that the Rockefeller Foundation is just there to make money. but maybe it's there to relieve the world of hunger. Now, why Mexico? Because in Mexico, where they actually did this project, they could actually get 3 seasons out of the wheat, per year. So they could actually run faster. They can actually create more. Okay, create more of these new varieties of wheat. So Borlaug and his colleagues developed a drought-hardy, rust-resistant strain of wheat, then crossed it with a dwarfed Japanese strain to produce a hybrid sufficiently short to survive the wind and channel growth into grain. So they actually created different varieties of wheat that were short, that were resistant, and with time, the history actually from then on followed through varieties that we call now pest-resistant varieties. Now I want you to notice that. We call the current wheat varieties pest-resistant varieties. Do you know what that means? I'm going to actually say it in what I believe is a very profound way. The grasshoppers do not eat it anymore. Do you get that? The pest-resistant varieties. The grasshoppers do not eat it anymore. So in 1968, Mexico, Pakistan, and India became wheat exporters of the new hybrids. So in a very, very short period of time, the hunger places became right the opposite, the exporters of the grain. In 1970, Dr. Borlaug receives the Nobel Prize. This was called the Green Revolution, but please do not let yourself be misled by the title. It had nothing to do with green, as we understand it today, the green, organic. No. Every variety had to have the corresponding dose of chemical fertilizer and herbicide, etc., etc. So there was the need of supplying the particular seeds, and to those seeds, the particular chemicals to make them grow and to give you the right outcome. Okay? Some people say to me, well, you come from Australia, there's a whole wheat belt there in Australia. Why the farmers don't go and plant the emmer, for instance, that we spoke about in the beginning? The emmer, that ancient variety from Egypt, for instance. Because if I am a farmer in Western Australia, the only way in which the bank is going to give me money to pay for my machinery and to pay for everything else is if I am going to put on the ground a product that has a market to sell, to sell it. Okay? So there are industries that are easily financed by banks, but you need to make sure that you put a crop in correspondence to what they are going to give you. So emmer won't give you a loan from the bank, okay, to help to pay for your machinery and so on. And farmers are paying a lot of money. They're moving lots of money, okay? They are hugely in debt, but they're moving a lot of money. But there are varieties that they need to plant. There are potato varieties that they need to plant. There are actually certain dairy numbers that they need to achieve in order to get the loans. Okay, so there are industries that are subsidized, and the emmer industry is not one of them. Okay, so unless you have a lot of money, you cannot actually plant it because farmers depend on banks to do their farming. Okay, so in the 1980s, the Green Revolution spread to China, now the world's biggest food producer. By 1997, 81% of the developing world's wheat area was planted to semi-drought wheats, giving both increased yields and better response to nitrogen fertilizers. Okay? So before we didn't need all that, by the way. You know, just before the Second World War, we didn't need all those fertilizers. Okay? Now, 99% of the wheat cultivated today has been hybridized within the last 50 years. Have you heard the 50 years mentioned anywhere prior this time in this presentation. Right in the beginning, when we said that we appear to be witnessing, according to that gathering study, we appear to be witnessing what it appears to be an epidemic of what? Of gluten-related conditions in the last 50 years. Just the time where these varieties have been fully introduced and fully developed all around. In fact, there is a company that is called Monsanto. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a great company. They own a lot. In terms of business management, they're great. I mean, they know how to make money, okay? They have patented a lot of seeds, not just wheat, but many corn and soy, many. Now, in 1997, they actually registered in the United States a process that they named Genesis. And they used that name, Genesis, as a chemical hybridizing agent for wheat by Monsanto Company. Now, think about this. A company called Monsanto is actually developing new varieties of wheat according to process of hybridization. They call that process Genesis. Why? Because it's they're varieties that were not there in the past. So they have like a creating power. Anybody knows what Monsanto means? You know, because you're from Mexico. Holy Mountain. So there are people that sit on the holy mountain of their own office and they claim God. And they name it, not a very strange name, a name that nobody can pronounce, not like a XW7 or something like that. No. Genesis. To do what? My humble opinion, to rub it in. Just to rub it in. So they sit in the holy mountain and they claim God, and they just to rub it in, they call it Genesis. Because in the book of Genesis is when the creation of God started. This is not coincidence, all these names, that they're rubbing it in. Well, they run in a very successful company. A very successful company. It is an international corporation. The wheat of today is a modern hybrid that did not exist in the past. In the 19th century, there were 6 historically defined varieties of wheat. How many? 6 families, okay? You have little branches from those, but 6 defined families. Now, anybody wants to guess how many today? 666, okay. That's a good guess. There's somebody here that says 666. More. 999. Okay, I'll just tell you, I don't know how many today. I know how many even 20 years ago. Even in the 80s, there are already more than 25,000 varieties as a result of the hybrid program. 25,000 varieties that were not in existence in the 19th century. So when my brother said, "You mean the bread of always?" I said, "No, the thing is that it's not the bread of always. It hasn't always been there. If you were there in the time of Jesus, he will not actually use any of this bread to actually create any miracles. Okay? Because this wheat was not there. It's a new creation created in the last 50 years of Earth history. And in the last 50 years, we've been witnessing an epidemic of wheat and gluten-related illnesses. And people are wondering, why more and more people are actually responding badly to the consumption of bread. Why? Now, these are called hybrids. So that Bambi has 6 legs. That little piggy has 2 mouths, and so is the serpent with 2 heads. Those are called hybrids. What is another name that you will give that? It's called mutation. It's actually called a mutation. But How many of you will feel uncomfortable eating something in front of you that a company calls it, I just mutated this tomato? It just doesn't sound right, isn't it? It's like you're eating it from Chernobyl or something. Now, a hybrid to this nature is a change in the makeup, in the genetical makeup of the original product to achieve a different characteristics in the outcome. Okay? So you can call it a hybrid, or you can call it by the other name, a mutation. So for instance, that's a lamb. It has 2 heads. Okay? Now we don't know why that lamb had 2 heads. We know, for instance, that if a woman is pregnant, has the embryo inside, and that woman is exposed to radiation, for instance, like at Chernobyl years ago, we don't know what is going to come out of that. Because we know in Chernobyl that babies were born without a head, or they were born with 7 fingers in each hand, or they were born without limbs, or there were many different things. Cows were born with more legs than what they meant to, etc., because they were exposed to radiation. You can also be exposed to chemicals. You can be exposed to a number of situations that generates a change in the genetical makeup of that embryo. And the outcome is, to a degree, unknown. Of course, science now can predict more and more the outcome. Did you know that the wheat has an embryo? That's part of the seed. In the seed, there's an embryo. In fact, the little plant of the wheat is already in the seed. It's already folded there, all just folded. So that embryo, exposed to any chemical or radiation or any other product, will give you a variation of the genetical makeup of that embryo, and the outcome is unknown. Unless science now can predict the outcome. Now, if you are in Mexico 50 years ago and you're planting different varieties and you expose them to different pesticides, and you expose them to different herbicides, and you expose them to different radiation or chemicals, etc., you will have a very ugly looking wheat coming up in some cases. But you will have the random one that will look, that one looks good. Actually, it gives you more, and it didn't grow that tall. We'll use that one, and then you just plant that one, and you keep on harvesting a line. You understand what I'm saying? Now, there is a number of products that kill grass, okay? There are a number of products that kill grass. Now, imagine you are in a wheat plantation, all full of wheat, and you have your airplane, and you are going to actually spray it with herbicide to kill the grass that is growing between the wheat. So you get into your plane, you get into this chemical, because it has to be a particular chemical for that particular variety of wheat. Remember, everybody has to supply into the whole process. So this particular chemical is in your plane. And now you're flying over the field because you want to kill the grass that is growing between your wheat. So you just spray it. A week later, that grass is dead. But the wheat is not dead. There's only one problem. What variety of plant does wheat belong to? Grass. Wheat is a grass. You explained to me how you just used herbicide to kill grass, killed all the grass around the wheat, but it did not kill the wheat. The wheat doesn't die. So, mom comes home and says, little Johnny, we've got visitors for dinner. Go to the paddock, kill a lamb. We're going to cook it for tonight. And you have 10 lambs there. And one of them looks just like this one, only one, just like this one. And you have visitors for dinner. And mom has told you to kill a lamb for dinner, okay? Now, seriously, will you kill this one and eat it? You wouldn't kill this one and eat it. Why not? Because I mean, we got something in our psyche, isn't it? We think that we are going to end up with two heads or something, right? So I wouldn't eat this one because it's just weird. You know, it has two heads. It's a hybrid, yes, but it's a mutation. Something has happened to this one. So guess what? That fellow is also a hybrid. It's also a mutation. And we don't have a problem with it. We don't have a problem eating that one. You need to bear in mind that the new varieties of today have arrived into the picture with great economic interest. There is a level of changes in the genetical makeup of the wheat. We are not talking about genetically modified wheat because to uncode the wheat, supposedly, according to the news at least, I'm sure they did it before, but according to the news, the genetically modified uncoding of wheat did not happen until 2015. So this is not what we're talking about. And genetically modified, as in the current understanding, is when you have a particular type of pistol, gun, that you break the chain, the genetic code, and you insert an outsider into that genetic code, and then you seal it. Okay? That was not done, or at least was not open to the possibility to be done until 2015. So this is technically, from today's standards of genetical modification, the wheat that we're talking about here is not genetically modified from that point of view. It's hybridized. Okay? In other words, they didn't use the gun and break the chain and insert a new code and seal it. But it's hybridized in a different way that still has changed the genetical makeup, has made certain things stronger and other things much stronger, certain levels lower and certain levels much, much higher. We'll get into that as we go to the next presentation. Okay? Until then, I want you to consider what we've just been presenting here of the type of wheat that has been consumed mainly for 98% of the population in this world consumes it, and it's a hybrid variety that has been affecting us for the last 50 years. There is a reason why you feel bloated. There is a reason why you feel some of the side effects of wheat. And the reason, or at least part of the story, has just been told. Thank you for your attention.